meeting to order and turn the floor over to the county manager.
Thank you. So every local government, including this county, of course, is required to present a budget to you as a board and the public no later than June 1st. Today is June 1st. So I'll go through the recommendation. You also will have a public hearing scheduled for June 12th where you receive public comment on the budget. You have until June 30th to adopt the budget. So every year when I present this, I remind you that as we get into it, I've done my best as with partnership with Allison to take your priorities and put into a document form. And if for some reason you get it and you say, gosh, we would have done things differently, or we want more here or less there, or whatever, that will then be your opportunity to review it and say, let's change things or let's leave it alone. So that's the board's prerogative, of course, at that time. So we love quotes, and I like this one because it says, don't tell me where your priorities are, show me where you spend your money, and I'll tell you what they are. So again, that's what a budget is. It is reflective of your priorities. So again, you know the organization, you know who you are and what you do, but it is a good reminder for you and the public of, especially the bottom half of the slide, there's about 20 departments, and that's just internal to us, of course. It doesn't count the external agencies that you fund. A lot of these that are discretionary, a lot of these are mandated. You're required, of course, to fund the public school system, the public health district, and others. So you make a lot of difference, especially for the internal, but also the external agencies in the community. So just a quick review of the current year. Don't have a dollar amount attached to the American Rescue Plan Act. But as you may recall, it's about $8.9 million. When you factor in some of the other monies that are more or less associated with ARPA that have come through either the state or other federal agencies, it really, in all these, I think we total up to about $43 million. So it's a lot of water projects in that, but a lot of money that this lady over here is processing through grant reports, through budgets. A lot of work goes into that, and so it's not to be unnoticed and appreciated. So we have received 2 CDBG awards in the past year. We're still getting those going. Again, close to $6 million. Small amount of that for housing rehab, the bigger part of the Freedom Life Project. Lots of water, like I said, over $800,000 for Hoppy Tom, $2.8 million for East End Water Project, $330,000 for the Exit 90 project in Nebo, and we have submitted at least one grant and working on others for West Marion Elementary to get water to that community and that school especially. Speaking of water again, this is a project that's been percolating a while. Nebo expansion for phase 1A and 1B. We've talked about it for about 18 months. It's finally soon to be under contract and under construction within the next month or so. We have a contract awarded to extend water and sewer universal property for business sites, including Forza. And breaking news, it's not in here, we received $1.3 million grant today from Golden Leaf for an additional graded site there adjacent to Forza. Shooting range, entering our second year of that being open. Rave reviews, we've had some tournaments there, a lot of outside county participation, and so a lot of great activity there. The word has definitely gotten out about that. We've received a $500,000 grant to do an accessible playground at the Maple Leaf Complex. Chad and I met with the playground company Friday. That is going to get started very soon. And Chad and his staff have done a lot of work on our existing parks with money provided to do some very noticeable things. Continuing, you allowed us to do a pavement assessment, which we had never done before, so a lot of our parking lots and driveways were analyzed by an engineer, and they gave us a scoring system to use for the next 5 to 10 years on how best to approach repairing our paved assets. We're underway now on Sugar Hill, and we'll start on some other lots very soon. We have a transfer station repair plan that's been prepared. We've applied for a $4 million EPA grant, still waiting on that to be decided upon, but if not, we do have some state and federal money to at least work on the transfer station. And you've had lots of conversations, discussions, and plans underway for DSS, the services building, the animal shelter, and others, including the recreation center complex that we're been talking about quite a bit lately. So that's the current year. Looking forward a little bit here. So while we're here presenting the FY 2024 budget. So you understand how a budget works. The top little circle there is state mandates. This is things that, and I don't have federal up there, but you could pretty much say that too. Federal and state mandates that you really have no choice. You have to fund those things, and that's public health, that's social services, and a few other things that you must do whether you want to or not. How you fund those things sometimes can be left to your discretion, but sometimes not. You do have board priorities. You're a different board than Burt County, Buncombe, Yancey, Rutherford, wherever else, and your priorities are different than theirs. And so where you do have discretion, you have, or your predecessors have decided to go in a different direction, either by offering a different service or at a different level than maybe a neighbor. So of course we have our agency and department requests. Every department head and outside agency, they have to advocate for their departments. They have to do what they feel is best in those requests. And I'm encouraging them to, but reminding them with, everyone else has priorities too. So, and then public requests, you're contacted by the members of the public that would like, something done here, whether it's a park or paving this or closing that or opening, so a lot of that goes into your thought process as well. So that all that is filtered through available resources, which we'll talk about, which is our revenues, and then we end up with a recommendation. So again, these are priorities I heard you've said over years, but especially lately. And some of this, if not all of it, is resulting in action and then recommendation. So you want to recruit and retain a high-quality staff through salary and benefit adjustments. A little over a year ago, you made a commitment of a significant amount for adjusting employee salaries. At that time, you initiated a salary study, and in January, made a decision to adjust salaries for this coming July. So that's reflected in this recommendation, of course. You would like, and I know it's a priority for Mr. Ellis, establish some reserves and better planning for capital enhancement projects, so that is accomplished at least to some degree in this recommendation. Made it very clear you'd like to hold staffing as close to current levels as possible. You'll see some impacts in a second, but some of those things we have no discretion over. Medicaid expansion. Again, most people have said, and I've heard even in this room say, that's a good thing, but the but is we have to add staff to handle the caseload.
And have space to put it.
And space, and so that's important too. And so we've had that, there are 5 positions for DSS in the budget, all related to expansion. We are opening Black Bear Park sometime this summer. We have a commitment to the public as well as Duke Energy to do that, and it has to be staffed. We can't have that unmanned. on staff. So that's in there as well. Beyond those two, you'll see at the tail end of the presentation, the unmet requests. There's no more in here, so in the recommendation. Health insurance, we've talked in this room a lot about our health insurance. We do not fully budget our anticipated expense. That is not a good way to operate a budget with hopes and dreams or whatever about an expense. And so we do try to make an effort in this to try to increase our funding for that. We're not all the way where we need to be, but we're trying to get a little bit further along than we've been. So not just to make Allison's job easier, but as you know, she goes through, if you don't, please remember that she has to go through the budget every year and essentially rebalance salary benefits and other line items to account for claims that are paid. So we're trying to actually properly budget where we are. This is something that's been more or less overlooked for decades, and we're trying to get it to a better place, just like a lot of other things. So again, I've talked about the process. I meet with department heads, meet a lot with Allison, lots of meetings and discussions all the way up even to today. So again, we present the recommendation to you today. You have time to look at it, think about it. You're going to have the hearing on the 12th, and you got all the way up until midnight on the 30th to adopt a budget. Please don't wait that long, but you do at least have until that time. So getting into some dollars and cents, if you added all these up, it probably does not quite add up to the bottom line impact on the growth of the budget. But these are some of the major expenses. I'm not going to read every one of them. You can read, as can the people here in the public, the room, just to highlight the things. These should be reminders for you. I don't think any of these are going to catch you off guard. I don't know what this is, or maybe something we haven't talked about in a few months or weeks, but very little of this should be a surprise. So again, we EMS facilities debt. That building has been occupied for about a year. We had interest-only payments while it was during construction, and then we started to pay principal as it was opened. And so that's fully realized in this budget. EMS operating capital, you'll see a couple of those, like the sheriff's office. There's one for waste collection in there. That is almost all supplies, fuel, maintenance, things that are outside our control. So if you said, well, no, put that at zero for all of those folks, we're going to cut something somewhere. We have to, because we're paying a vendor for those medical supplies, we're paying the vendor for the fuel, whatever it might be. Those are things that we have no control over. Again, continue the public safety thing. You have the salaries and benefits for both the EMS and sheriff's office there. Then moving down to county organization improvements, so non-public safety. You see the other raise and benefit impact. The health insurance, that's what we were talking about earlier. That's a big chunk, $600,000. That is still not close to meeting the recommended funding level from the broker.
How much did you increase per employee over last year's allocated amount?
$930.
So what's our total now, Allison, per employee now?
$784.
74.
I think that sounds right.
And to equal it out based on prior year's claims, needs to be around what number per employee?
I have a figure of 1,300. The medical group says 1,200.
It's a big number. So the retirement system rate increase, not to dwell on that so much, but again, this is part of a multi-year plan that the retirement system is spread out to all the member governments, where we're putting in increases to make sure there are funds to actually pay the retirees as they retire over the next 50, 100 years, forever essentially. Black Bear Park staffing, That's 1 full-time and 3 part-time positions. There's the Medicaid staffing, again, I mentioned earlier. The software for the HR system I mentioned. And half of that, so that's the dollar amount impact, but half of that is being paid for by one-time funds. So it's really about 46 netted. So some equipment payments, EMS, which is related to vehicles as a sheriff, as is waste collection. The capital reserve, this is what we talked about last week, whether this is a building payment or it's just a reserve set aside for a building purchase or whatever it might be. It's not attributed to one particular building. It's just, it's a set aside for a building project or renovation or something that might come along. So it's a community economic development projects. We've got recreation impact. This is mostly Black Bear Camp operations. So before was the staffing. This is the maintenance and supplies and things. There is some fuel and maintenance in there for the rest of Chad's operations. If you remember a couple of years ago, there was a Part F match that was in the budget. The project, this is for Old Fort, the Trailhead Park. That project kind of went on ice for a while, and it's back alive. And so we don't have it in the current year budget, and so it's back in the budget this year. Or the recommendation, sorry. Our insurance agent says our property and vehicle insurance is going to go up $265,000. So this is the growth, okay, not what the bill will be. This is the growth from current year. This isn't based on our experience. Well, it's a little bit of an estimate, but this is just the trend of the market right now. So a lot of governments are being very expensive to cover. Some insurance companies are saying it's too risky, we're not doing it. And so it's just an expense we have to deal with. Talked about waste collection earlier, fuel maintenance. It's getting harder to buy trucks, and we're having to keep older trucks on the road longer, and they're more expensive to maintain, of course. We do have one on order, and it's probably about 8 months out still. The watershed, again, we contract with a third party to mow the watershed dams. I've held that at a certain level for about 4 or 5 years, and I can't hold it anymore, so we have to increase that contract. The DSX technology, this is the system we approved several months ago. Again, about half of this is going to be paid for with federal funds, and a little bit more than that, we are hoping to reserve some current year funding for this expense in July. So that's the upfront expense, and some of it may come off on the backside. And then juvenile housing, your DSS directors talked about some of the issues with juveniles being incarcerated. This is an expense that we are paying when a juvenile is housed in a confinement facility. So that cost is increasing, exponentially over the last couple of years. It's very sad. Again, more impacts. Almost all of these are things, again, no control over, okay? Increased solid waste disposal costs. We're having a lot more waste come in. It's fuel surcharges continue, even though we're holding where we were. If you recall, we reset that fuel level. Still very expensive. This solid waste reserve fund, we were told in a letter about a week ago that we had to set aside that money for a future closure of the transfer station. And so we just have to set it aside and let it grow a couple of percentage points every year, and can't really touch it. So that's fine. The Forest Service is a state function that we cooperatively fund. They had an increase in there. The revaluation fund, we need to start building that fund back up. It is about the $20,000 level. It's maybe too soon to talk about another reval, but it's not. We have to be thinking about the 27 reval pretty soon, so we need to build that fund back up.
Has a firm that was hired to do the current reval, Have they been paid all the money?
No, sir. There's still some remainder in there. Health Department operations, we work cooperatively with Rutherford County on funding that department, of course. This is a 5% increase for that department. She's had to increase her salaries to keep them and attract people just like everyone else. Foster care, that's an issue that, again, Ms. Sigmund has talked quite a bit about. One of the impacts also from this that we've seen in recent bills is that the board payment for foster payments to foster parents is being increased. And so even without some of the issues we're having, we would even have to do this much, if not more, because of foster parents being paid more.
Is that money for therapeutic care?
That's just adding to what we're already budgeting. So we're at about 1.4, something like that in the recommendation. So that includes, that's the total expense, and so there is some offset there. So our county amount is smaller than that, but so that includes your foster parents, that like average Joe's. It includes facilities as well. There also is a change for family kinships to where they'll start to be paid as well.
That's probably a big deal there because they're not getting any money now.
Right, and it's great for them, but again, it's another budget impact. So it's a big expense, of course.
So what would be the chance we would give the PSS back to the state?
They're actually, it's probably a humorous question, but there was a bill filed about 4 years ago that would have made that function a state function. My guess is that they probably wouldn't have removed your responsibility to fund some part of it, or they would have taken a revenue to offset it or something, sales tax or something. But it went nowhere. They did some reforms with it, but a lot of counties were not pleased with the proposal. They wanted to have local decision-making, local control. So I thought that was an interesting response, but most states, it is a state function. So as far as the proposed budget amount itself, $61,668,108. You see the increase over the current year and the percentage increase. So here's a comparison for the past 8 or 9 years as it relates. And so this is a new slide for this year. If every department, internal, and every agency, external, was recommended for what they requested, the budget would be over $65 million. So about $4 million more than what the recommendation is. And you see what the tax rate would be if all this were met. So we met last week. I asked you to give me guidance on the tax rate. I've done that a time or two before. I don't like to guess where you want to be on that, and you directed that the rate be lowered a penny. And so you see that recommended rate at $56.75. And you see the tax base at $6 billion and some change. For reference sake, I don't have a slide for some of our Western neighbors and peers, just because I've looked at it recently. Macon County is about $12 billion. So if you have somebody in the public that says, well, Macon County lowered the rate to 27 cents, well, their base is $12 billion and yours is 6. So it's not always apples to apples. And so they do have some national forests there, but they have highlands.
What's the percentage of that land in McDowell County that is in the national forest?
So ours is about 24%. That does not include land that is in private conservation.
Yeah, there's closer to 30% when you look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
They're So if it's, a lot of that private conservation land will probably be public land at some point. So that percentage will, at that point, it'll still be national forest and other, but that state or whatever other federal.
I think it'd be at least 30%.
I absolutely agree now with you. So again, we love pie charts and things. Almost every county, if not every county, the property tax is probably going to be close to that percentage, around 50%. And so sales tax is historically and this current coming year is our second largest. But you see the social community, which is the intergovernmental transfer from for DSS primarily, the public safety fees, which is EMS and jail revenue, and then licenses and permits and things. So again, significant revenue changes. You see the property tax. I mentioned DSS. There's a cost share there. It's not always 50-50. Sometimes there's an expense where it's 75% federal, 25% local. Sometimes it's 50-50. But whenever, well, typically when we increase an expense, there's an offsetting revenue to some degree. We didn't total the sales tax changes, but it's a little over 500,000 of an increase. Real estate tax, that's something as far as a decrease, that's just related to fewer sales. And so you see some things when you're having fewer sales, you'll see that reflect in the real estate tax. Our building permits are still up, so that's a good sign. But if that number ever starts to trend downward, that's reflective of an economic slowdown as well. The tourism number, it's about $1 million. There is $1 million. That is money that is more or less a pass-through that we collect on their behalf. We do have an administrative fee that is used to offset some of the collection costs, but almost all of it goes for promotion.
What is that fee currently at? What is that fee?
We're at 5%.
What does the state say the average should be?
I don't know if there's a recommendation on it. The trend is to go to 6. I haven't heard that from the TVA board or any staff. That's
But we said whatever fee we want, correct?
I believe it's a legislative action.
So what's the max fee?
I don't think there's a statutory max. The legislature could probably do what they want, but I'm not aware of any over 6.
And you're saying that's going to grow about $490,000, so what do you believe that fee for our staff?
And that could be something I'm sure the TVA, some of the board might like, some might not, but if some neighboring counties, if they were not at 6, I think that's where you get some issues, especially Little Switzerland area. But I'm not sure what Mitchell is right now, to be honest. Great question there. Again, the expenditure, it's a little small there, but you've got it on your slide. Our largest expenditure by category is public safety. And then human services, which again is mostly DSS, but also health department, a few others. Education, and then general government. And so most of this is reflective of your priorities. Again, in human service, there's mandates in there, and if you take out the federal funding, I almost want to bet that the second piece of the pie would be education. Stand corrected. Speaking of local education funding, you had expressed some interest in leaving this funding essentially frozen for the coming year. For the most part, it is. The college is opening an Old Fort campus adjacent to the Rocket Building complex, hopefully in the next fiscal year. So there is $13,500 for that expense.
And if that doesn't happen, in next fiscal year, they'd sit there and just carry over, right?
It could, and that's something we'll check on. And I'll talk more about education fund in a minute. And so this has been a slide, I think every presentation I've ever seen in the past 20 years. We used to have the fire departments as a general fund funded service. We no longer fund fire departments through the general fund. That's now through a separate fire tax. So when that came off, we've continued to have the solid waste fund allocation on here. Many counties that have a solid waste fund have a household user fee, a solid waste fee, a household tax, whatever you want to call it. It's essentially an availability fee. There's all different names for it. Some people call it a trash tax, but it's a fee that is set on, it can be on every improved property, including commercial, but it's typically thought of for residential, to offset that general fund allocation. So that equates to 2.88 cents. And then some debt service highlights. Again, we talked about the EMS base. It's going to start trending downward pretty much after this coming year, peaking at about 600,000. The jail courthouse and the court and Reddition are our three biggest that are on the debt schedule right now. You see the payoff dates. 2040 is a long time away. Don't know that I'll be here, but somebody, Mr. Walker and some of the rest of you might be, but I don't know that I will be. But it's nice to see that we only have three major ones, but we've had discussions about other needs, so just keep that in mind. But again, kind of wrapping up here, that you have another meeting to go to, but want to hit some future concerns. This budget, again, is your priorities primarily, and our point is to try to address those. We can't do everything in every budget. But sometimes it feels like we try and we get kind of spread thin, but school funding is something that I know, I don't want to say to each one of you, but quite a few of you said, well, let's try to hold things, including school funding. But there was usually, we know our responsibility there. So something to keep in mind, and I've mentioned this before because it's been mentioned to me by the school officials. This coming year, they have requested 3% of an increase. Again, it's not in there. Once you get it, you can do what you want. Advising you for the following year, so fiscal year 25, there are several impacts that are in the current budget that are grant funded. So universal pre-K, there's some mental health staffing that's very important these days, but that's in there that they're using either like Dogwood Health Trust funds or using ESSER funds, which are going to evaporate essentially at the end of the coming fiscal year. And so these are decisions that were made to address some urgent needs. But again, the funding is going away. So discussions need to happen between this board and that board. In my opinion, my recommendation, if you change things as far as this coming budget, absolutely, that's fine, of course, but regardless, there needs to be conversations about these things, especially universal pre-K, where you've got families enrolled and planning to enroll there.
It's very important.
And if that goes away, we're back to whatever we had before, which, maybe is, daycare is having, the 4-year-olds maybe staying at home with grandma or whatever. And maybe that was fine, but this is something that it seems to be important. It is to the school board and perhaps to the community. So encourage, and staff is there and wants to, if you want to, have conversations on how to figure out how to sustain that. So again, no solutions in there for the coming year, but we probably need to talk about them. Capital, we've talked somewhat, quite a bit throughout the presentation, maybe not specifically, but you've talked quite a bit about social services. You have no concrete plan. I have none for you as far as replacing those 3 buildings with a new one. We've talked about some of the costs. you're talking about a 30,000 square foot building. If you build new, that's very expensive. You know that, you're looking at $20 million probably to build a building that size these days, if not more. And so that's something that has to be addressed at some point. Emergency services, I've had this up there for a while. Again, it's one of those, it's fine, but we're in the lower level of the police department. We've had discussions, but no plans yet, but that's just something to keep in the back of your mind. Parks and Rec, always need to be thinking about improving that for our young people especially, lighting of ball fields and, new bathrooms, whatever it might be. That can all be very expensive and very challenging to fund with grants for rehabilitation. Kind of wrapping up here, the court system continues to grow. I've talked a lot about probation and parole. They're pushing us constantly for space. Talk about the services building. At some point, maybe in my career, that entire building, the old admin building, may be judicial staff. It seems to maybe have slowed down a little bit, but it could just be like that, and we're meeting with judges again or whatever. So that whole building may at some point be essentially just part of the courthouse. What do you do then with the tax office? They're pushed out to somewhere else, more than likely. Public services, I talked about the transfer station. If we don't get that $4 million grant, we'll get by. The existing road will improve, the scale house will improve as we can and funds allow. But there's a lot of major expense involved with maintaining something that's beat up every day with those trucks. Transit, again, one of those we're fine right now. We're making it. We're in rented space. It's more or less fine. We do look for grants to find a new facility to build one. It's an 80-20 federal local match. But again, not a huge priority, but again, trying to have you...
80 federal, 20 local.
Yes, sir. So, and we have asked for planning grants, because we have to have a plan, not just for our benefit, but for theirs. And so we have asked for planning grants for that as well. So, again, just planting seeds, just simplify the way. I believe close to the last slide here. The staffing, I talked about earlier that we're doing about 6 full-time and 3 part-time employees. That does not count the 27 that were asked for by other departments. So I say that to tell you that all these department heads, elected officials, said, I need this staff count to function with all the things going on. Not to just have more people to hang out with. They're saying they're going to do something that's important, okay? Or they probably won't be asking for it. So they're not in the budget. Some of these folks might stop you at the church, the grocery store, call you or whatever and say, hey, you might have seen that. I really would like those positions. Y'all can decide whether it's this or other things we've talked about.
Well, you recommended what you recommended, so we just say that's all we have recommended. I mean, but you gotta show us the money.
Right, if you don't like it, taking the garbage can and throw it away, and we could start over. But so trying to honor your request, to try to you're focusing this year on keeping the staff you've got and recruiting existing positions and not focusing on adding positions. It's the budget in a nutshell. Again, you've got the public hearing scheduled for the 12th. The budget will have to be approved by June 30th. If you would like to have any sort of meeting, any discussion, budget workshop or what have you in between, just let us know and we'll get it scheduled.
What's the fund balance projected here to you?
No idea at this point.
Okay.
Okay.
You've got 29 minutes? No, I'm sorry, 19 minutes to the next meeting, sorry. Try to go as fast as I could.
Okay. Your motion to adjourn.
So,
Second.
all in favor? Aye. Did that.